Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Good evening and welcome to America at a Crossroads. We're really glad you're here tonight. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and it's a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of our leadership team, former Congressman Mel Levine and former LA County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky. So many of you are dealing with bitter cold and extremely challenging weather tonight, including our guest, Dennis Ross. And while I live in Los Angeles, I actually spent part of last week in Philadelphia, where I got a real taste of the frigid temperatures and even a taste of a wicked sleet and snowstorm. So wherever you're joining us from, I hope you're staying safe and warm and that more moderate weather finds you soon. It's a real pleasure to welcome back Dennis Ross this evening. We always value your clarity, your judgment, and your ability to help make us make sense of complicated and of troubling times, especially in the Middle East. We're grateful to have your perspective tonight on Israel, Gaza, and the broader regional and political dynamics. Welcome to Dennis Ross, and we're equally fortunate to be joined by our moderator, the wonderful Warren Olney. Before we begin, just a quick look ahead. Next week on February 4th, we'll turn our attention to American politics with one of the country's most respected and widely read political analysts, Ron Brownstein. He'll be in conversation with Pat Morrison on a timely and important topic, and one that's on all of our minds, the midterm reckoning, what's likely and what's at stake in 2026. The following week on February 11th, we're honored to welcome Carol Leonig, the five-time Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter, formerly of the Washington Post, and now with MS, I think it's called MS Now, but it's MSNBC News. Her powerful new book, Injustice: How Politics and Fear Vanquished America's Justice Department, could not be more relevant, and she'll be in conversation again with Warren about the erosion and defense of justice in America. After tonight's program, you'll receive an email with 7 or 8 upcoming events. As always, we've worked hard to bring you exceptional voices on the most consequential issues of the day. We hope you'll continue to join us and invite others to do so as well. If there's someone you'd like to add to our mailing list so they receive program announcements and usually paywall-free access to some excellent columns we share, you can put their name and email address in the Q&A, and I will add them to our list, or simply email me directly in response to any of the emails we send. I will get it. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome Warren Olney. Warren's career in journalism spans decades, and his contributions to radio, television, and to public understanding are truly remarkable. He has received an astounding excess of 40 awards for his work, many of them multiple times, including a double Lifetime Achievement Award from the LA Society of Professional Journalists. Warren, thank you for your integrity, your curiosity, your lifelong commitment to the pursuit of truth. We're grateful to have you with us tonight at America at a Crossroads. Warren, I turn the show over to you.
Janice, thank you so much for that very generous introduction. You're very kind, and I appreciate it very much. Dennis Ross has specialized in Middle East policy for decades. He was the primary U.S. envoy for the Israeli-Palestinian peace process under George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. He was Middle East special assistant to Barack Obama, and he was special advisor for Iran under Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. He is now counselor and distinguished fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He's author of several books. He writes frequently for the New York Times, the Washington Post, and in many other publications as well. And Mr. Ambassador, it is great to be back with you on America at a Crossroads, and thanks very much for joining us.
Warren, it's always a pleasure to be with you. I was just thinking about, I think I met you the first time in 1972, so we both go back quite a ways.
It was during the McGovern campaign, I believe.
It was, yes.
For those who can remember those days. Well, I'll begin the questioning. Of course, our audience will be able to ask questions later on chat. There's just so much going on in the Middle East. It's really hard to know where to start. But this week, the remains of the last of 251 Israeli hostages were recovered in Gaza. That seems like a good place to begin. It's key, or said to be key, to ending phase 1 of the ceasefire. What has it triggered, and what's coming next?
So he was the last body. He was actually killed on October 7th. Ron Gavili. His body was actually recovered by the IDF. It was not Hamas who turned over his body, but the IDF recovered his body in what's known as the red zone. Gaza today is divided into a green zone, which Israel basically controls. It's 53% of Gaza. There's a red zone that's 47%. Hamas stood down where this cemetery was in northern Gaza, mostly, I think, because of Turkey and Qatar. Israel was allowed to go in and basically exhume a couple hundred bodies and check out forensically if, in fact, they had the right one, and that was the case. So the last body out of the 251 was returned to Israel. The Israelis had said they would not go ahead with phase two, and I'll explain phase two in a second, unless all the bodies were recovered. That was the commitment that Hamas had made as part of phase one. Did they play games with that for a while? The answer is for sure. The President Trump had insisted that we go ahead with phase two, even if the last body hadn't been recovered. Prime Minister Netanyahu had agreed that would be the case, so it meant this was quite unpopular within Israel itself. So the fact that that last obstacle was removed now lets us go into phase two. So what is phase two? Phase two basically revolves around the following: the establishment of an alternative administrative governance in Gaza. Under the umbrella of the Board of Peace, there is under that rubric, under that heading. By the way, when I say the Board of Peace, this is a body that is chaired by President Trump. It has a number of leaders on it. It is, I don't want to say it's purely ceremonial, because it also has been invested by a Security Council resolution with complete authority for the next 2 years on everything in Gaza. Executive power, legislative power, it completely has it. It has created a board within the board to serve an executive function. It has a special representative, someone named Nikolai Mlodnov, who will be the interface and who will oversee what is called the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. This is made up of 15 Palestinians, all from Gaza, all with technical expertise and background, none specifically identified with factions, although Ali Shath, who is the head of it, was a deputy minister in the Palestinian Authority. So the first thing that phase two embodies is the creation of an alternative administration for Gaza under the heading of the Board of Peace. Related to this is then not only the administration, but there has to be a security function, which will be served primarily by Palestinian police who've been trained in both Egypt and Jordan. The numbers at this stage, I think, are probably between 1,000 and 2,000. They are to be backed up by something called the International Stabilization Force. Its mandate, its rules of engagement, honestly, are still being developed. I can tell you, I know that there are 2 countries who are not yet prepared to be announced that will be part of this. There are others who are still discussing it. They will play a supporting role behind the police function. The National Committee for the Administration of Gaza has established itself. It will go into Gaza within the next day or so. They will set themselves up in the red zone, the zone where Hamas is in control. They have issued a public statement already about what their purpose and charter is. They aim to address the needs of all the Palestinians within Gaza. One point I should make before going on, when I say that the Israelis control 53% of Gaza in the green zone, less than 5% of the Palestinians are in the green zone. More than 95% are in the red zone. The reason that this National Committee for the Administration of Gaza is setting itself up in the red zone is because they want to be relevant. They will focus early on providing immediate humanitarian needs. There have been 4,200 trucks a week that have been going into the red zone, but the vast majority of those have actually been commercial trucks. And Hamas has been taxing those, which is the way they've been developing and acquiring revenue. The first task will be to provide a lot of portable housing. I was in Israel for 3 weeks up until early January. I was there when there were some pretty bitter storms, not measured in cold, but measured a great deal of rain. A lot of the tents in Gaza washed away. So portable housing, uh, medicine, baby formula, just household materials will come in. They will not be taxed by Hamas. They will be delivered with the Palestinian police. So Hamas will not play any role in this. And this will be the first step in building the authority of this National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. Two last points, and I'll stop. The crux to phase two is not what I just described, although that's the beginning of it. The crux to phase two is the disarmament of Hamas. The disarmament is to include its heavy weapons, its light weapons, and the tunnels, the location of all tunnels. President Trump has said there's a timetable, which he hasn't spelled out when that has to be done by. The reality is, if disarmament doesn't take place, there will not be reconstruction that takes place. You can have rehabilitation, you can have removal of rubble, but there will not be any serious reconstruction. I say any serious reconstruction in the red zone so long as Hamas does disarm. Now, the disarmament process can be in stages, and it can take place in different locations, and reconstruction can take place in the red zone in those places where disarmament or decommissioning of weapons has taken place. But the key to the second phase, the key to reconstruction, the key to transformation, the key to Israeli withdrawal from Gaza involves having a credible process of disarmament of Hamas. We will see, I suspect, within the next 2 weeks, maybe the first demonstration of some decommissioning of weapons. If that's the case, we'll see what is a process that will go in stages. You will see reconstruction go parallel to that. It will not go, if you don't see it, and the Israelis will not withdraw from what's known as the yellow line, which divides the green and the red zone, until there has been sufficient credible disarmament to justify the withdrawal.
Will journalists be allowed to come in and record the disarmament process?
I suspect they will be. Here, I think Hamas will have a big interest in demonstrating what they're doing. One of the things the Israelis fear, by the way, is that this will be a show. You know, there'll be old weapons, it'll be not the key weapons, and so they want great visibility for this. Israel wants to be sure that this is meaningful. What makes it meaningful? All right, that they give up the remaining rockets that they have. That means they give up the mortars, they give up the anti-tank missiles, they give up the machine guns. What I just described is the kind of heavy weapons that represent a threat to Israel. But the AK-47s and the Kalashnikovs, they represent a threat to the people who live in Gaza. That's the means in which Hamas maintains control. So you really, I suspect you start with the heavy weapons, you move to the lighter weapons, but they'll also have to be turning over of the location of where the tunnels are, just to put that in perspective. The Israelis control that 53%, and they will say that they have basically dismantled or destroyed half of the tunnels in the 53% of Gaza that they control. They have not dismantled or destroyed the tunnels, maybe not more than 20% in the area that Hamas controls. So there's a lot that needs to be done there.
Tell us more about the Board of Peace, which it seems to me is a very unusual thing, particularly when the UN Security Council has approved it, and yet at the same time it is said to be competitive or potentially competitive with the United Nations. And what exactly is the role of President Trump?
It's an important question, because if you actually read the charter that the Board of Peace has put out, obviously drafted by the Trump administration, you might be surprised to know that the word Gaza does not appear in it. And I think what that suggests is the aim is to create what they call a much more relevant institution for settling conflicts around the globe. Now, the irony there is if in fact the president's aspiration here is to create a competitor to the Security Council, a more effective institution than the Security Council, then he needs to demonstrate that Gaza works. If the whole purpose of creating the Board of Peace initially was to show that this would create an alternative to Hamas, that this would end the war, create an alternative to Hamas, create a pathway to the future. And if it doesn't do that, it's going to be hard to see how the Board of Peace will have any legs or have an appeal for anything else. The role of the president, I think, and here I'll say this with diplomatic understatement. Oftentimes, I think it's fair to say the president may exaggerate his role in settling conflicts, and it will exaggerate the fact that others are coming to him and asking him to play the role. In this case, I will tell you that it was not an exaggeration. And the reason is that all the countries that wanted him to be the chair of this, they wanted him to do it because they were afraid he would lose interest and his interest and his attention would be elsewhere. And it's pretty clear that unless he stays engaged, or at least has a stake in having this work, it's unlikely to. He has leverage on Turkey and Qatar, who are critical to moving Hamas, and he clearly has leverage on Prime Minister Netanyahu. I don't believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu can say no to him. Turkey and Qatar will probably never say no to him. It doesn't mean they'll necessarily say yes, but they want to prove to him that he has a stake in good relations with them. And so delivering on this, I think, is a way to prove that. To be fair to them, they played an instrumental role in getting all the hostages out. Most Israelis, including, I will tell you, to a person in the security establishment in Israel, were convinced that Hamas would hold a few hostages. And in the end, they did not. They may have played game with the process because they were supposed to relieve all the live hostages within 3 days. They were supposed to move very quickly to release all the rest of the bodies, and they didn't do that so quickly. But the reality is, we start off by discussing all of those who were held. In the end, they were released. Now, just to again give you a fact that's worth keeping in mind, there were 46 people who were taken as hostages who were killed while they were in Gaza. So 46 who were taken alive did not return.
So it takes, if you want to be a permanent member of the Board of Peace, you have to contribute $1 billion. Very few countries, though, have even signed up to be, at least allies of the United States, have signed up to be on the board.
Right.
Why not? Why haven't they joined?
It's interesting here. I think in no small part, the Europeans have not joined it not because of the money issue, but because they saw it as being constructed as an alternative to the Security Council. And they didn't want to be a party to playing that role. Now, so they're not on the Board of Peace, but to be fair, they are expressing in private an interest in playing a role in the transformation of Gaza. So even if they are resisting the idea of being on the Board of Peace, they do want to continue. They would like to play a role. I suspect the more time goes by, we may see more of them be prepared to play a role, maybe not just an informal one, but a more formal one as well. You have a large number of Muslim countries, both Arab and non-Arab, who are on the Board of Peace, who agreed to be on the Board of Peace, including at this point the Saudis and the UAE, who right now, for their own reasons, seem to be quite in a state of rivalry.
So President Trump's role is really to be determined. It sounds as if and has a lot to do with what he decides he wants to do and what he's interested in. What about the new Gaza that's proposed by Jared Kushner, a $25 billion enterprise? And is that pie in the sky or something more?
Well, it's obviously something that would take a long time to develop. On the one hand, Gaza's been devastated. Imagine 80% of the buildings in Gaza have been either destroyed completely or partially destroyed. It is basically a devastated area, so you're dealing with a need for massive reconstruction. there are 60 million tons of rubble. It's interesting that Ali Shah, who is I said, the head of this National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, he looks at that rubble as actually being raw material for some of the rebuilding. But you first have to clear it, you have to organize it, and that's going to take time. I think Jared's plan depends very heavily on the readiness of outsiders to invest in building this. And there's no question that there are some who see this as countries that see this as a kind of economic bonanza for them in terms of getting the contracts to rebuild. Obviously, Egypt's next door and counts very heavily on this, but I think Turkey also is looking at a lot of its contractors coming and playing a role on the ground there. The kind of great aspiration that I think Jared Kushner is and the vision he has for it, is it impossible to achieve? I'm not sure it's impossible to achieve, but I think the timeline is not a short timeline. I think it'll take a long period. I think it is critical that the mindset of Palestinians will be that this for them is something to be achieved. I want to mention something, Warren. I went into Gaza after Ariel Sharon announced that Israel was going to disengage, but before they withdrew. I went in the beginning of 2005. Israel withdrew completely from Gaza in September 2005. They withdrew. They had 8,000 settlers. They're all pulled out. The military they had there all pulled out. They were going to turn over basically the settlements that had been built there. In the end, they did not, because there was a kind of rivalry among Palestinians as to who would take it over. They ended up destroying that, but they didn't destroy the greenhouses. Hamas did come in and destroy the greenhouses, which would have been a benefit to Palestinians. I mentioned the point because I went in and I gave a talk to a couple hundred Palestinians there, and I said, you turn Gaza into a going concern. And it won't just be the international community, it'll be Israelis who will say, okay, well, then why not for the West Bank? But you turn it into a platform for attack against Israel, who's going to take that failed model and say, gee, we should apply it elsewhere? Well, right now, you actually have the potential for an alternative Palestinian administration to transform Gaza, assuming Hamas doesn't block it by not disarming. And I think a great deal of pressure can be put on Hamas not to do that, especially if Turkey and Qatar are joining a kind of collective voice and saying, you have to disarm or you're blocking the reconstruction, especially if Palestinians in Gaza will say that. The more there's a sense that there's an alternative, the more they are likely to say that. And the more you begin to validate an assumption of Palestinian responsibility and accountability, the more you can create an alternative vision. There has been a narrative about this conflict that has always put the Palestinians as victims. And the truth is they have been victims, but they've also been the victims of not having a leadership that was prepared to assume responsibility, a leadership that always wanted to present itself as victims. Palestinians are victims, but that's a condition. It shouldn't be a strategy. There is a potential to really create a new narrative for the Palestinians. If you can transform Gaza, I think there's an interesting potential here. Can it produce the full image that Jared Kushner was talking about? I would love that to be the case. I suspect you're going to have multiple stages before you can get close to something like that.
Would you describe yourself as cautiously optimistic?
I would describe myself as hopeful. The reason I don't tend to use the word optimistic, because optimists tend to think things work out on their own. And the one thing I know, especially about the Middle East, nothing works out on its own. So you really have to operate on the basis of, is there a possibility? A possibility has been created here. Whether it's going to be fulfilled remains to be seen. It will take real hands-on, and it won't be the president who's doing the hands-on, but it will take real hands-on. And I'll point out two things that give me some reason for hope. One, the person who's been appointed as a special representative of the executive board, that's really what they call, there's the board of peace and then there's the executive board. And he has a day-to-day responsibility. Is a guy named Nikolai Mladinov. He's a former defense minister and foreign minister of Bulgaria. He was also the former representative of the UN on the peace issue. He is the single best person from the UN that I ever worked with. He speaks fluent Arabic. He knows all the parties well. He was able to work effectively with Arabs, with Palestinians, and with the Israelis, not something that typically one saw with UN representatives. He knows Gaza inside and out. He knows the issues well. He knows all the parties well. He takes a problem-solving approach, and he's being empowered. And again, think about this board. The executive board has the power to legislate and to implement. It has been empowered by the Security Council, and it can legislate, for example, that no one can carry arms except those who are designated by the Board of Peace. So if Hamas is carrying arms, that would be unlawful. Now, will that matter to Hamas? That's something likely to be tested. But he understands that this has to be done in phases. Nothing's going to happen overnight. He understands there has to be delivery, that the more this committee of the Palestinians that is seen as being the responsible for governance, the more they're seen as delivering, the best it will be in terms of building their credibility and authority. And again, their charter is a very smartly written one in which they say, we have a responsibility to govern all of Gaza. We have a responsibility to produce development and reconstruction and law and order and a basis for a future for Palestinians, not just politically, economically, socially. And I know some of the people on this committee, they take themselves very seriously and they feel they now have a chance to be empowered. The critical question is going to come back to Hamas. Hamas would love to create what I call the Hezbollah model for Gaza, meaning you have somebody else responsible for all the governance, which Hamas wasn't very good at, responsible for paying all the salaries, for delivering the services, and they somehow keep their guns so no one can impose on them. That's, I think, what Hamas would like. I think we see an international construct right now that there are ways to put pressure on Hamas that would give them increasing incentives to go along with this. One is to isolate them. One of the mistakes the Israelis made all along was keeping the onus on themselves, not acting in a way where they were prepared to support initiatives that would put the onus on Hamas, that if things don't go forward, it's because Hamas is blocking it. Too often it was the Israelis. They weren't delivering humanitarian assistance. They put the focus on them where the focus should have been on Hamas. Right now, the way things are set up, the focus is on Hamas. And Hamas defines itself as organic to the Palestinian people. So if it looks like it's actively preventing reconstruction in Gaza, that becomes a cost for Hamas. So I think the right kind of orchestration with someone like Mladinov, who understands this very well, on the one hand, and I think the fact that there is the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Turkey and Qatar have a stake in showing they can make this work. That gives me a reason to be hopeful at this point.
As we talk about all of this, there is an American armada that is on its way to Iran. Apparently now it's drawn up very close to Iran, including one of the biggest ships in the world, the aircraft carrier, the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln. What do you think is the reason for this, and what are the potentials for it, that armament?
Well, I will say I probably lack the humility I should have when it comes to predicting things in the Middle East. I do retain a lot of humility when it comes to predicting what President Trump will do. Having said that, I will say he said Iran could not kill its public. He said a couple of weeks ago, we're locked and loaded. He tweeted out that help was on the way. The estimates of the number that the Iranian government, the regime, has killed range from a low of 5,000 to 30,000, almost unimaginable over a period of like less than a week that they could have killed those kinds of numbers. The reason the higher numbers have some degree of plausibility is because people have been able to reach in and survey people in all the hospitals. These are the numbers that they're coming up with. So the 5,000 number seems to be quite low. Maybe the 30,000 is a little high, but I'm not sure that it's a non-plausible number. So having claimed that he wouldn't permit this, that help was on the way, that we were locked and loaded, to do nothing in the face of what Iran has done uh, would make the president's words ring hollow, and obviously ring hollow not just there but elsewhere. So he seems to feel he's on the hook to do something. He also, it has been part of his, he did this before with the Iranians. You recall, he gave the Iranians 60 days to negotiate an end to nuclear enrichment. And on day 61 is when the Israelis began what became the 12-day war. On the last day, we joined and went after the targets. Now, that whole argument, he said basically publicly, I gave them a chance, they didn't take it. He's using the same kind of language, say I'm giving them a chance, and he's offering again a deal. The deal is more demanding than the one that he was posing prior to June. They will give up any right to enrich. They will not do any enrichment of uranium. They will limit dramatically the number of ballistic missiles that they will produce. They will limit for Hamas and Hezbollah their support to purely political support. I think it's highly unlikely that the Supreme Leader will accept that, even though I will tell you, I think there are those within the Iranian elite who would like him to do so. Iran is profoundly vulnerable right now. They have no air defense. People forget, in the 12 days, Israel had complete mastery of the Iranian airspace. They were flying over Tehran, close to 1,500 kilometers from Israel at will. And they have tried to rebuild their air defense, but only with their indigenous air defenses, which Israel did not have a hard time blinding. They have not gotten air defenses from the Russians or the Chinese. The Chinese were providing mixers to help them with the rebuilding of ballistic missiles, but even that they put on hold. Most of that is being done domestically. So they're quite vulnerable, not to mention they have a public that even if the demonstrations and protests have stopped, it's a public that is extremely angry towards the regime. But this is a regime that if it feels its survival is at stake, and if they don't respond, they're threatening, using the language they've always used before about what will happen if they get attacked. But I suspect this time they will do more than what we've seen before. After Soleimani was killed, they threatened a great deal, and then they attacked one base, the Al-Assad base in Iraq. They gave the Iraqis forewarning as a way of signaling, look, we're going to do this. The implication was we won't do anything more. We didn't respond. They did the same thing after the 12-day war, where they hit the Al Udeid base in Qatar, but they informed Qatar in advance. It allowed us to improve all the defenses to minimize the effect. President Trump took that as okay. They responded. Now we can end this. This is going to be more complicated. I'm not quite sure what the end point of it is this time, but I still think one thing the Iranians know, this regime is extremely vulnerable right now. The irony in the case of the Supreme Leader is that he feels if he doesn't do anything, that threatens the future of the regime. Question is, how long are they prepared to go on? If you start something, if the U.S. starts something, similarly, they're making it clear they will attack American bases and American friends in the region. It's interesting that the defense minister of Saudi Arabia is in Washington today and tomorrow. I suspect he's here because he wants to know, look, if you are going to attack, what are you going to do to help defend us? Iran has many more short-range ballistic missiles that can hit the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. They don't have as many of the long-range missiles that can hit Israel as they once had, but they still have the capacity to hit Israel. They probably still have, I would say, probably close to 1,000 long-range missiles. They have many more short-range missiles. So there's a question, no doubt, on the part of, I think, the Saudis, okay, if you're going to do this, what will you be doing to help defend us if the Iranians retaliate against us?
How many American troops are in that region? How extensive is the American armament, and how vulnerable would it be to Iranian attack?
We have about 35 to 40,000 forces in the region. The Iranians also have a lot of drones. They also have a lot of cruise missiles. So we have a lot of early warning there. And one of the things that the carrier, when we talk about the Abraham Lincoln, it's not just the carrier. The carrier is part of a battle group. It has cruisers, it has destroyers. Those cruisers and destroyers carry anti-missile capability with the Aegis cruisers, which is a very effective anti-missile system. We have a lot of aircraft based there beyond what the aircraft carrier brings. They can provide a lot of the defense against certainly against the cruise missiles and drones. But to think that there wouldn't be some vulnerability there, I think there's some risks for sure. So I think what we haven't seen before is an Iran that has wanted to get into a tit for tat with us. And the reason historically has been this supreme leader was there when Khomeini basically declared an end to the war with Iraq after he had said he would fight that war as long as it took, because after all, Saddam Hussein invaded Iran. But what happened? We began to reflag ships during the Reagan administration, and because what the Iranians were trying to do is to cut off Iraq's ability to export its oil, and so because that was a source of their revenue, we reflagged all shipping in the Gulf. In the course of doing that, we took out most of the Iranian Navy. We took out their oil platforms. We inadvertently, although they didn't believe it was inadvertent, we shot down a civilian airliner. And at that point, there were people around Khomeini who came to him and said, we can't go on. And so he said, he ended the war and describing it as the equivalent of drinking poison from a chalice. The president of Iran at that time was Khomeini. And the lesson he learned from that was don't get into a shooting war with the United States because it will threaten the regime. The reason they developed a proxy network was, again, they're quite happy to fight to the last of their proxies. They've never been willing to be engaged in a war with us. The problem today is that instinct not to engage in a war with us which was driven by a sense that it would threaten survival, now not responding to our attacks is seen by the Supreme Leader as threatening survival. And agreeing to what Trump is offering as a deal, he also sees as threatening to the regime. So something has to give in this circumstance. I don't think he's going to agree to a deal right now, at least not without there being something else from the U.S. And I think that President Trump doesn't have an easy ladder to climb down from what he said. Now, maybe he will decide to hit Iran and say it's a one-time thing because I said they were going to pay a price for what they did. We've now imposed a price, and that would be his explanation for kind of one and done, which seems to be his preference for the use of force. So I don't discount that as a possible way. And then the question is, do the Iranians do the equivalent of what we've seen them do before, do a one and done on their side as well? The logic would suggest they need that because they can't have a lot of confidence that if they're hit really hard, if we go after the command and control mechanisms of the forces that impose in a sense, the suppression of the Iranian public, that means they lose some of their means of controlling the public. Does that not then threaten the regime? So I think this is not a simple calculation on the part of the Iranians, but I think if the president does one step, I'm not sure how many more he wants to take, and I'm not sure how many more the Iranians would want to take as well. But what I'm describing is kind of rationality prevails. This could quickly take on a life of its own. If they succeed, for example, in killing Americans on bases in the area, or they're able to sink some of the ships, I think that's a harder proposition for them because I don't think we'll be operating within the Persian Gulf. But they have a lot of anti-ship missiles. So the point is, if they're successful in responding to us, then you create the potential for an escalatory cycle.
Thank you so much for your very extensive answers to these questions. And it is time now to go to the chat session and the questions from our viewers and listeners. And Eric wants to know this from the beginning of the program. Is it realistic to think that anybody can disarm Hamas? Can actually Israel do that?
It's a really good question. Israel has obviously weakened Hamas dramatically, but in 2 years it didn't disarm them. So, they may have 10% of what they had at the beginning militarily. They were a military, they're not a military anymore. But total disarmament, that's a different story. Israel could incrementally expand the green zone, meaning shrink the red zone, and in a sense do more to take apart the tunnels, but that's messy and it would take time. So the answer, I think, is nobody's going in to physically disarm Hamas. The question is whether Hamas decides that it's in its interest to disarm. What I'm suggesting is there's a political set of pressures that can be put on them that will raise the cost of Hamas significantly. There are more economic pressures that can be put on them as well. And there still is the threat of Israeli military force, because they could decide to incrementally expand the red zone and go after the remaining Hamas leadership. It might be messy, but Hamas can't discount that as a threat. And again, look at President Trump. He says if you don't, it'll be horrible, horrible. I'm quoting him: horrible, horrible for Hamas if they don't disarm. And the implication is he'll turn the Israeli military loose. And I can tell you, there are plans on the Israeli side to do it. So that creates the pressure, but it also creates a greater incentive for Turkey and Qatar and Egypt to impose on them. Now, Turkey and Qatar have a lot of leverage on them. They create a kind of sanctuary for them, especially after the failed Israeli attack on Doha. President Trump made a commitment: no more attacks like that by the Israelis. So Turkey and Qatar are political, basically provide political support for them, sanctuary for them. In the case of Qatar, money for them. So they can put a lot of pressure on the Hamas leadership. And I think they are saying, look, you need to transform yourself into a political actor, not a military actor. I don't think Hamas will be quick to do that, but I think Hamas will have an interest in showing they're going along with a process. The key will be making that process credible. Initially, the first stages will be designed from Hamas's standpoint to show they're doing something while still trying to protect what they would like to preserve. I think this is something that requires real monitoring, a real constant effort by Turkey and Qatar and Egypt, a lot of continuing pressure from us so that they're responsive. So I do, the idea of somebody actually going in and disarming them, I don't see that. Them going along with a process where they're turning their weapons over, I see a potential for that. I also see the difficulty of seeing it to the end.
Kathy from Ohio wants to know, given Trump's erratic and worsening behavior, psychological and cognitive, what impact will this have on world leaders dealing with him? Canadian and European leaders appear level-headed, unlike the authoritarians.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Kathy from Ohio.
Well, I think we have to divide how the rest of the world is going to deal with President Trump. I think in the Middle East, they prefer a transactional relationship rather than a values relationship. He is certainly transactional. They will focus on what they think they get from him. And, obviously he focuses on what he gets from them. I think a lot of the Arab Muslim states are saying, okay, we know how to deal with him. I think what the Europeans have found is that the effort to, in a sense, ingratiate themselves to him has limits. I think the response at Davos to Prime Minister of Canada Carney's speech was quite interesting in the sense that many took a lesson from that and said, okay, we can deal with Trump, but we're going to have to also stand up to him. I think we may see more of that coming from Europe, where, in a sense, they will focus more on a kind of collective action as a way of building their collective strength. Where they can deal with him and work out things with him, I think they will still want to, but I think they'll draw lines and say and make it clear. When he was talking about Greenland, you saw a kind of collective response. Not only did you see, a discussion about putting military forces there and exercises, but you saw a readiness to react to tariffs with pretty formidable tariffs in response. So I think where in the eyes of Europeans and NATO countries, the president seems to draw a line, I think they will have a collective response. Where they think they can work with them because it's in everybody's interest, they'll do that as well. Look, we see I think with the Chinese, they'll take advantage of what they see as their ability to enhance what I call their soft power. They don't have great soft power, but right now we have almost none. And they will try to fill in by saying, well, we're a responsible actor on the global stage, and we will see more. I think the Europeans will do more with them, even though their eyes are open and they'll keep it within limits. We will see, now we see a European deal with India. We'll see more alternatives to us. And Carney's argument that middle powers have to band together because either they basically will do that or they'll become victimized. We'll see more of that. And don't assume this has just a short-term effect, that if we have a change in administration in 2029, there'll be a hesitancy. There's going to be a belief that, look, how do we know we won't face something like this again? So I'm afraid that our alliance system is not going to be quite as stable as it has been or quite as sturdy as it has been. Doesn't mean it will disappear, but there'll be more hesitancy. Europeans will assume much more responsibility over their own defense. It's not the worst thing, by the way. Every president I worked for wanted the Europeans to assume a greater share of responsibility for their own defense. Although I will say every president I worked for didn't want them to be completely autonomous either when it came to defense.
Susan wants to know, how does the continuing settlement building in the West Bank, without regard to international law, affect any chance of this program's success? I'm not sure what she means by this program, but what about the settlement building in the West Bank?
So I want to address it in the following way. You have a minister in Israel, Minister Smotrich, who is both the finance minister and he's a minister in the defense ministry, and he has a determined policy to make a Palestinian state impossible. He has created farms in the West Bank which didn't exist before. He has turned more private Palestinian land into public land where settlements could be built in 3 years than had been the case in pioneers all the years since 1967. What I was getting at is, if you can transform Gaza, it can be the first step in moving towards Trump's 20 points. By the way, point 19 of the 20 points said if the Palestinian Authority faithfully carries out reform, that can create a pathway to self-determination and statehood for the Palestinians. By the way, no American president had ever publicly embraced the idea of self-determination for Palestinians. That's point 19. So if you can transform Gaza, you have the potential to move towards a reunification politically of Gaza and West Bank, because built into these 19 points is the transition from this interim administration to the Palestinian Authority if they reform, and that moves you on that pathway. Smotrich is trying to guarantee there'll never be such a pathway. That's where President Trump made it clear publicly that he won't allow annexation of the West Bank. The problem, this goes to the heart of the question, is the de facto annexation that's underway. And that is, I think the Arabs, they got him to say there'll be no annexation. I think Saudis, Emiratis, can come to him and say, look, the de facto annexation undercuts your point 19. So he can use his leverage in regard to that. Now, why is this so important? So important because a one-state reality is being created. I know there was a question before we came on about the issue of one state, and I want to be very clear about this. If you want to see a perpetuation of the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians forever, then you favor one state. There are two national movements competing for the same space. They are deeply connected to the land. Their national identity is deeply connected to the land. The reason I've always favored two states for two peoples is because the only way you can satisfy these two national movements and identities is by two states for two peoples. It is completely unrealistic to think we can produce two states anytime soon. Both Israelis and Palestinians have been completely traumatized. They cannot imagine making concessions to the other. This is a reality right now, and it will be the reality for some time to come unless you can create alternatives on the ground that begin to show, okay, cooperation is possible. The reality in the Middle East is every single state where you have more than one identity, national, tribal, clannish, sectarian, those states are either at war with themselves, paralyzed, or failed states. If you want that for Israelis and Palestinians, that's what you'll get in one state. That's kind of the left-wing approach to one state. The right-wing approach, which is the Israeli right, is, well, we'll have one state and the Palestinians will simply accept that they'll have a subservient status. They won't be citizens. No, they won't. So either from the standpoint of the left or from the right, one state will guarantee this conflict forever. We may not be able to produce two states anytime soon, but we can produce a pathway that begins to create a sense of possibility. The question, there will be an election in Israel this coming year. It could be as soon as June. It's probably more likely October. And there will be, I believe, a change in government. I don't believe the next Israeli government will have either Ben-Gvir or Smotrich in it. That next government has to put a halt to what he's doing. And here, President Trump has the leverage, and he can have an effect, and he needs to have that effect.
Rachel Baumbach wants to know, what is your view of the pro-Israel support within the Democratic Party? What policies would you recommend that would unify the party while still being pro-Israel?
Yeah, there clearly is a split in the Democratic Party. I think Israel has to play its own role here. First of all, if we have a different Israeli government and it is doing what I was just describing, it stops the expansion of settlements, certainly outside the blocks. The notion of settlement blocks and swaps is something that I helped to formulate back in the year 2000. The logic was 80% of the settlers live in an area in about 7% of the West Bank closest to the Green Line, meaning closest to the June 467 lines. The vast majority of Israelis who live in the West Bank live in those blocks. So building there is consistent with two states. Building outside there is not. You have to halt what Smotrich was doing, and I think if you have an Israeli government that makes it clear it's going to halt that, you have an Israeli government that makes it clear it will stop the lawlessness of some of the extreme settlers in the West Bank. That will help. If you have an Israeli government that says, look, we may not believe in two states right now, but we also commit to understanding it can't be a one-state outcome, and we commit to developing a political horizon so that there can be coexistence with Palestinians, that will help. And then you have to have an Israeli government that's also prepared to reach out to, I think, Democrats here. And I think then centrist Democrats who believe that look, there's a reality. There is one country in the world that has a very vibrant grassroots movement, and it's not the United States, it's Israel. You know, we had a No King's Day here. 7 million people turned out. In Israel, on a weekly basis, the Saturday night demonstrations there were producing the equivalent of 3 times what we were doing on No King's Day. And this, you know, they were there to, in their mind, save their democracy. This was against the judicial reform. Then it was putting pressure on the government to get the hostages back. The fact is, you have one country that has a very vibrant grassroots movement because they are committed to democracy. One of the dangers of the current Israeli government is it seems to be in the eyes of most people, and I would even say most in the Jewish community here, that they are threatening the future of the Israeli democracy. I think we'll see an election that tends to fortify it, and that will help here. I think those who believe in the U.S.-Israeli relationship also have a responsibility to make it clear that they want to preserve a U.S.-Israeli tie, and they want to preserve a relationship built on values, not just interests.
Phil wants to know, wasn't there supposed to be concrete steps toward a Palestinian state as be part of phase two? And what became of that? And where do the Saudis and other Gulf states deal with that, or how do they deal with it?
Well, there are, but they're also, by the way, they're not just what the Palestinians get, it's also what they have to do. For example, there has to be real reform. The Palestinian Authority is completely corrupt. So there has to be an end. You have to have a serious approach to ending corruption. Number one. Number two, you can't have independent militias. There has to be commitment and tangible commitment to producing that. Number three, there has to be a commitment to coexistence. That means the narrative of resistance has to give way to a narrative of coexistence. Number four, there has to be a commitment not having alignment with those who reject Israel's right to be there. So I would construct a parallel set of steps where you stop the expansion of Israeli settlements, at least outside the settlement blocks. You reverse some of the legal changes that Smotrich has made, so you can't change the status of the territory. I think, as I said, when Prime Minister Netanyahu says that those who carry out this violence against Palestinians are a really small number, there's only 72. Well, if that were the case, why haven't you stopped it? There needs to be arrests made of those who've been responsible for carrying out the equivalent of pogroms against Palestinians. In other words, there need to be parallel steps that show both sides are doing what's important. The Israelis are stopping actions that would make a Palestinian state impossible. Palestinians are taking steps that demonstrate they're serious about assuming responsibilities. When one talks about statehood right now, it can't just be a slogan. It can't be a substitute for thought. It has to reflect tangible steps that will be taken. And as I said, the tangible steps need to be taken on both sides, not just one side.
We've come to the end of the program. You've said that you don't want to use the term optimistic. We do have a tradition on this program in the memory of David Lauer, one of our former associates, of trying to lighten up a little bit at the end of the program and put a smile on people's face. I wonder if you can do that.
Well, I don't know if I can put a smile on their face, but I'll come back to the reasons that I feel hopeful. I think there is actually an interesting moment here. And the moment is there are Palestinians who want to step forward right now and show they want to build a different future. That gives me a lot of hope. And I think that the key here is to empower them and to enable them. They're there. Look, the Palestinians on a per capita basis have the highest degree of postgraduate degrees of anybody in the Arab world. This is a highly educated, very intelligent people. They have succeeded every place. If you look at their diasporas, every place they've been successful. There is no reason why they can't be successful if they are empowered. And I think there's a potential here to empower them. They've never had a leadership that focused on responsibility and accountability. And if we can create an environment where that becomes possible for them, and it's pretty clear that as I said, I know some of the people on this committee, they're serious people, and giving them a chance to succeed, to build, to produce, and to be validated, that gives me hope. And I think there's an opening here. I don't mean to be Pollyannish. It's not going to be simple, and Hamas is an obstacle, but there's a real possibility here.
Ambassador Dennis Ross, as always, a great program. Thank you so very much for being with us. Next week, it's going to be, Ron Brownstein with Pat Morrison. Thanks a lot for listening tonight and learning a lot if you're the same as I'm. Thanks so much again, Dennis.
Thank you for having me.